The Islamic world today, minus a handful of authoritarian, tourism-focused oil nations, are hubs of anti-intellectualism, extreme patriarchy, poverty, and generational dysfunction that keeps repeating itself. Of course, there are many reasons for this. But what if I told you one particular tradition sits quietly at the center of it all? One that has been virtually non-existent or deliberately weeded out across all other major civilizations, yet remains normalized and completely unquestioned throughout the Muslim world. A practice so deeply woven into family life that it shapes health, society, identity, and even national outcomes, while the rest of the world tiptoes around it. A tradition everyone knows exists, but no one wants to talk about honestly. Well, in today's video, we are going to talk about inbreeding in Islamic countries. From Saddam Hussein's first cousin marriage, to the Saudi and Qatari royal families who have practiced it for generations, to Bashar al-Assad's father marrying within his own clan, this isn't a fringe habit. It's mainstream across the Islamic world, and some of the primary reasons come from the formation of Islam itself. The Quran lays out a detailed list of who you cannot marry: your mother, daughter, aunt, sister, stepdaughter, foster sister, an entire roster of forbidden categories. But cousins, they are conspicuously missing. In Islamic law, what is not explicitly banned is automatically halal, and the Quran even specifies the daughters of Muhammad's paternal uncles and aunts as permissible to him. This wasn't a small detail. In a society where prophetic behavior is the gold standard, millions of Muslims took it as an endorsement. The early Muslim community normalized the practice immediately. Muhammad's marriage to Zainab, his own first cousin, is part of the core narrative of Islam, directly referenced in the Quran. Fatima's marriage to Ali, also a paternal cousin of Muhammad, reinforced that example for generations. The Quraysh elite continued marrying inside their clan, and later rulers and scholars never challenged it. For 14 centuries, every major Islamic school of jurisprudence upheld cousin marriage as fully valid, leaving no room for stigma to grow. Compare this to the Christian world, where the church spent nearly 1,000 years banning cousin unions, sometimes as far out as the 7th degree of kinship. Europe was forced, by law, to marry outward, dissolving clans and widening social networks. Jewish communities too often discouraged close-kin unions, and East Asian societies built strong taboos against them. Islam moved in the opposite direction. By legitimizing and modeling cousin marriage, it preserved a practice that other civilizations abandoned centuries ago. That religious approval solidified a lineage-based system powerful enough to survive into the modern age, unchallenged. Now, before we get to the next part, if you're enjoying this video so far, please remember to give the video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and consider signing up on Patreon, which comes with a ton of perks. For anyone who has lived inside these societies, the persistence of cousin marriage never feels accidental. It survives because it serves the interests of the people who control the social order. In regions where tribes and extended kin networks form the backbone of daily life, loyalty is everything. Families bind themselves together through marriage so the lineage never spills outward. The preferred Arab match, the father's brother's daughter, loops the family tree back into itself so the paternal line remains a closed circuit of obligation. In places where survival once depended on clan unity, this became a habit that outlived the conditions that created it. The family's honor, its alliances, its internal politics, all of it kept inside the same circle of names. Wealth consolidation plays into it just as strongly. Landowners in rural Pakistan, merchant families in the Gulf, and political clans across the Middle East have long treated marriage as a tool for keeping resources under a single banner. Bringing in an outsider means dividing property and influence, while marrying a cousin keeps every asset tied to the same patriarch. Even middle-class families think this way. Running a business through cousins feels safer than handing part of it to strangers. Layered on top of this is the reality of patriarchal control. When a girl marries a cousin, she never fully leaves the authority of her birth family. She moves from her father's household into another branch of the same network, watched by people who share the same notions of honor and shame. In conservative settings where women rarely interact with unrelated men, cousins become the only socially acceptable candidates anyway. And once a community expects its children to marry within the family, breaking that pattern becomes a rebellion against the entire kin group, not just an individual choice. Unfortunately, Speaking about issues like this, even in Western countries today, is taboo. So taboo, in fact, the NHS in the UK is promoting cousin marriage as a good thing. Critiquing issues like this that revolve around Islam is becoming increasingly difficult. That's exactly why I use Proton VPN and why I think you should too. They're based in Switzerland, outside the reach of US, EU, UK and Australian law. They don't keep logs and are built by the same team behind Proton Mail. When the UK passed its surveillance laws, Proton VPN became the #1 app on the App Store. Their stealth protocol beats censorship firewalls. Secure Core routes your traffic through privacy-first countries, and NetShield blocks trackers before they ever reach you. I've used Proton Mail since Australia announced sweeping surveillance laws last year, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it's now essential. If you want to protect your privacy and support this channel, hit the link below to get up to 60% off Proton VPN. When you follow the consequences of this tradition into hospitals and genetic clinics, the picture becomes brutally clear. In communities where cousin marriage has been repeated for generations, the genetic load doesn't just rise, it compounds. Doctors in countries like the UK, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan and Lebanon have spent years documenting the same outcome: a sharp spike in recessive genetic disorders among children of related parents. In ordinary circumstances, about 2 or 3 infants out of 100 are born with serious congenital problems. When the parents are first cousins, that figure reliably doubles. The Born in Bradford study, one of the largest of its kind, tracked more than 11,000 births and found that serious defects appeared in around 1 in 15 children born to cousin couples, compared to roughly 1 in 40 among unrelated parents. Put bluntly, the closer the parents are, the more likely their children will suffer. In Britain, the numbers are impossible to dismiss. A population representing only around 3% of national births accounts for nearly a third of the country's recessive genetic disorders treated by the NHS. Child death review panels in cities like Bradford and East London have had to confront the uncomfortable truth that a striking proportion of local infant deaths involve congenital anomalies strongly linked to parental consanguinity. In some areas, more than 1 in 5 childhood deaths involve children whose parents are closely related. And beyond visible birth defects, the cognitive consequences are often even more severe. Neuroscientists and epidemiologists studying high consanguinity populations have repeatedly found elevated rates of intellectual disability, development delay, and certain recessive forms of autism. One study published to the Wellcome Trust found that children from cousin marriages in the UK had significantly high rates of learning disabilities caused by recessive mutations. In parts of Pakistan and the Gulf, pediatric neurology departments report clusters of conditions: microcephaly, metabolic disorders affecting brain development, and forms of childhood dementia that barely appear in societies that outbreed. IQ itself is not a single gene trait, but when dozens of harmful mutations accumulate, the overall development profile of a population shifts downward. The consequences ripple far beyond the family home. Entire school systems feel the strain. High numbers of children needing special education services, more severe learning impairments, more long-term disabilities. Health systems bear the cost through repeated surgeries, lifelong care, and specialized support. When this pattern scales up, as it has in parts of the Middle East and South Asia, it becomes a national development issue. A country cannot fully modernize when a significant share of its children begin life with preventable genetic disadvantages. And when enough of those futures are compromised, the damage doesn't stay confined to individual families. It spreads across the whole society. Over time, you see what scientists call autozygosity, long stretches of identical DNA caused by repeated close-kin unions. You don't need to memorize the terminology to grasp the consequence. When a population becomes more homozygous, more recessive disorders appear, more children begin life with development hurdles, and the overall distribution of cognitive and health outcomes shifts downward. Not dramatically at first, not in a single generation, but slowly, like erosion. One family's tragedy becomes another family's tragedy, and then another, until the effects blend into the background noise of national life. Schools feel it first: stretched special needs programs, high rates of learning disabilities, more children needing one-on-one support. Health systems feel it next: pediatric wards full of rare recessive conditions unknown in outbred populations. Economies feel it too, as the workforce carries a heavier burden of preventable disability. And in countries already struggling with corruption, factionalism, and weak institutions, this biological drag compounds the political one. It chips away at national potential from below, generation after generation, long before extremists or dictators enter the picture. When you look beyond the individual stories, the sheer scale becomes staggering. In some Muslim-majority countries, nearly half of all marriages are between cousins. Pakistan's rates sit between 40 and 60%, and parts of the Gulf pass the 50% mark with ease. Yemen, Sudan, Iraq. The pattern is almost identical. These aren't isolated traditions, but nationwide habits shaping entire generations. And the same pattern follows diaspora communities. In Britain, roughly 55% of British Pakistanis still marry cousins, and among British Bangladeshis, the rate sits around a quarter. In cities like Bradford, consanguinity within Pakistani origin families can reach 40 to 60%, enough to reshape the caseload of local pediatric clinics. Birmingham sees similar concentrations, with several wards where cousin marriage is reported at over half of all unions. Child debt review panels are forced to confront the numbers. In London's Redbridge, around 20% of all child deaths involve children of related parents. When 3% of national births end up representing a disproportionate share of the country's genetic disorder burden, the scale becomes undeniable. Look, it's easy to make the classic inbred jokes. I've done it too. But we need to take a step back here, because the tragedy here isn't abstract. It's not just statistics or charts or academic papers. It's children, real children, born into societies where religion isn't simply a belief system, but the final word on what is allowed. Islam didn't invent cousin marriage, but it gave it divine permission and prophetic endorsement. This has created a system where even the smallest chance at a healthy future is negotiated away before a child takes their first breath. What makes it worse is that the people most affected, so women and children, have the least say. And this is just one example of how Islam's refusal to reform doesn't only hold back progress, but actively harms the people living under it. When a religion protects practices that damage its own children, it stops being a spiritual guide and becomes a barrier to development, a ball and chain around the ankle of every society that still bows to it. And until this changes, the cost will keep being paid by those who never had a choice.
In the neon haze of a broken dawn, steel towers hum, but the wild runs on. A shadow moves through the circus below, half machine, half beast, with a violet glow. They thought the outback was lost to the flame, but a ding